All right, Alexander, let's talk about the military situation in Ukraine. And it does look like we are seeing a slow motion collapse on the front line for the Ukraine military. In some directions, maybe not so slow. In the progress directions, things seem to be speeding up. But what's your assessment of the situation on the front lines?
I would agree. I think it's actually speeding up. There are three places where the fighting is now incredibly intense. One is the Ocheretino Avdiivka Progress area, where clearly the Russians are moving, and they're moving fast now. I mean, they're advancing, many kilometers a day, and fortified positions are falling one after the other, and the Ukrainians there are not fighting. Now, there was a very weird story that was circulating over the last couple of days, which has been picked up by the media, even in the West, and it actually illustrates quite well what is happening. So there's this village which is Progress. Progress is on a hill. It's in this area of the Ocheretino sector. It's one of the outlying villages that form the defense lines for Pokrovsk. It had been apparently fortified under former President Poroshenko, and it's on a hill. So all of the indications were that it was a place where the Ukrainians would stand and fight and try to hold the Russians back, who have been advancing rapidly right through this area. And there's reports also that if the Russians capture Pokrovsk, city of about 50,000, biggish place, not huge, but it's the major logistical and supply base of the Ukrainian army in Donbass. And apparently, if you look at the front lines, it's the hinge point. So, it's the place where the Ukrainians have to go through if they're going to keep the two parts of the front lines, the front in Zaporozhye and Kherson region, and in the west and the south, and the part in the north, in the rest of Donbass. If you can keep them together. If they lose Pokrovsk, they run a real risk of having these two big area regions split from each other, that the Russians will be able to break through and divide, in effect, the entire front line in both places. So Pokrovsk is important, and by definition, Progress was important as well. And it was on a hill, it'd been fortified. There was every reason to think, therefore, that the Ukrainians would make a stand there. They didn't. The Russians just steamrolled up, and the village fell basically without a blow. And then we got the reports that started to circulate over the next couple of days that 2 battalions of Ukrainian troops in that area had been surrounded, and they'd been told to stand and fight, but they refused to do so. And they retreated, and they broke through their encirclement, and this has been talked about, and it's been built up as, a major story and the achievement of the Ukrainians in breaking out of the trap. I don't know that there was a trap in this area at all. I'm not sure that there was any sort of trap. The Russians never claimed that they'd encircled or trapped 2 Ukrainian battalions in this area. What it looks like to me is as if the Ukrainian troops, who had been tasked with the job of defending Progress, simply fled. And in order to, make that, to spin that, to make it look better than it was, this, story of the troops being surrounded and, breaking through the encirclement was, constructed in its place. Because the fact is that the troops fled, apparently disobeying orders, and this key village fell. Now that tells us that morale in this area on the part of the Ukrainian army is very bad. The Russians are advancing irresistibly, and the Ukrainians don't seem to be able to organize a coherent defense to hold them back. And the same story is repeating itself in other places. So Toretsk is a big mining and industrial town to the north of Donetsk city. It's quite close to another big city called Gorlovka, which is part of, kind of say, the Donetsk conurbation. The Ukrainians had heavily fortified it. It was supposed to be one of the most heavily fortified positions in the entire front lines. Been fortifying it since 2014. The Russians began to attack this area, Toretsk, back in June. And Ukrainian defences have simply collapsed. Again, fortified positions. But the Russians are just cutting through like in a knife through butter. Places which one would have expected it would take months of heavy, grueling fighting for the Russians to capture, they're able to capture in days. And the speed of the advance there is astonishing. And going further north still, other important town, which is Chasiv Yar. Chasiv Yar is the gateway to Kramatorsk, which is one of the sort of major cities that the Ukrainians still control. Budanov, the head of Ukrainian intelligence, said that all the best men in the Ukrainian army are in either Kharkiv region fighting the Russians along the border or are concentrated in Chasiv Yar. And the fighting in Chasiv Yar has been very intense and very difficult. But even there, the Russians now apparently have broken through. We got reports some days ago that the Russians, in fact, not just reports, film some days ago that showed Russian troops in the centre of the town. Yesterday, we got many more reports confirming not only the presence of Russian troops in the centre of the town, but showing that they control a large area of the central and eastern parts of the town. And again, one senses that resistance there is starting to crumble. Not as quickly as in the place that we spoke about, Pokrovsk, Progress, nor as quickly as in Toretsk, but still, we're starting to see the defences break down. So, yes, it's a slow motion collapse still, but it is a slow motion collapse that is getting faster. It's a little bit like, the avalanche. It starts with a small number of pebbles, then the pebbles turn into bigger stones, then the odd boulder falls, and then eventually the whole cliff collapses.
Yeah, the F-16 narrative, the wonder weapon narrative, is also crumbling. I don't know if you saw the Washington Post article, which said that don't expect any game-changing effects from the F-16. So, I mean, they've come to the end of the road as far as the wonder weapons goes as well. I mean, because F-16s, that's it. I mean, it's a bleak military situation and outlook. I mean, there is no path to victory, or at least I can't see one. I don't know. Yeah.
I mean, I cannot see one at all. The other thing is absolutely the F-16s. We were told about how, they were going to be the game changer. It turns out they only have 6 pilots to fly them. 6? Against the, Russian Air Force, that's hundreds and hundreds of pilots, advanced aircraft. And of course, the F-16s are, to be honest, I mean, they're quite old. To go back to the 1970s, and yes, they've been refurbished, but they're not, even by American admissions, up to the level of the advanced Russian fighter jets that they would be up against. But we've had articles that have appeared about shell production in the US and Europe that it's far below target, and barely shifting upwards. We've had articles again appearing that Patriot missile production is basically plateaued, that they've hardly managed to increase it to any significant degree. Germany's cutting back on arms deliveries to Ukraine. Britain has given up effectively making arms deliveries to Ukraine, and there is a manpower crisis. Now, the Ukraine has been undertaking a mobilization over the last few months. We've been hearing huge amounts about that. There's been all these pictures of men being seized on the streets and things of that kind. But there was a report yesterday. Well, there's been a number of reports over the last few days, one from Estonia, which said that Ukraine, all it is doing with this mobilization is trying to plug the holes in the Ukrainian units to try and reduce, plug the holes that have been inflicted by the Russians through all their various losses. There's not enough men being provided by this mobilization to create reserve brigades. So Ukraine is almost out of reserves. And then there was another report yesterday which said that despite the mobilization, the great majority of Ukrainian soldiers are still the same soldiers that were conscripted or joined up the army back in February and March 2022. That, in fact, mobilization is producing relatively few extra men to fight in the war. So, given all that, it is impossible to see, what the pathway to survival is, let alone victory. I think this is something, again, which many people in the West are in complete denial about. They're not looking at the situation as it really is. They want to still believe that there's some kind of stalemate, that, there is still time to turn the situation around in some way, or at least wait, it'll take a couple of months or even years before the collapse comes. They're not recognizing how bad the situation on the front lines has now become. Ukrainian troops retreating without, against orders, which is what seems to have happened in progress. Ukrainian troops giving up fortified positions at incredible speed. Places like Toretsk, towns like Pokrovsk becoming threatened, and key supply lines about to be cut, and the veteran motivated soldiers becoming fewer and fewer in number, and finding it more and more difficult to hold the line with and being replaced where they have to be replaced by soldiers who are far less motivated and are not prepared to fight in the way that the older soldiers were.
Yeah, it's too painful for them, for the collective West, to realize what's happening. Yeah, agreed. Okay, any other final thoughts? Wrap this video up.
The extraordinary. I mean, I think that on the one hand, the West is in denial about this. I think much of the rest of the world, the major powers, China, India, Brazil, they can see the direction of events. And they've been making a big effort over the last couple of days to get the Ukrainians to see sense. So Orban went to Kiev. He got the raspberry from Zelensky. And the only result of that was that he got oil supplies from Russia cut off, which is, petulant and childish and stupid, but there it is. And the Ukrainians sent their foreign minister Kuleba to China. It's taken some time for a genuine sense to come out of what happened over the course of that visit. But it's clear that Kuleba came with no new ideas, still insisting that, Ukraine must be given back all its territories. Apparently the Chinese are furious about this, and the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi had apparently a very angry meeting with Tony Blinken. And if you read the Chinese readout carefully, it looks to me as if Wang Yi basically blamed the Americans for this Ukrainian pig-headedness. Modi is now is the next person who's going to try to get the Ukrainians to be a little more realistic and a bit more rational. I think he's going to come away every bit as frustrated and disappointed as everybody else. And in the West, well, the Biden administration is not going to shift policy, nor are the Europeans, it seems. we're heading towards a smash. It's now, I think, almost hardwired. I don't think there's anything that's going to stop it.
Yeah, well, Orban, China, hungry China, India, they made one last effort. It's not gonna help, and Ukraine is just trying to buy time. The Zelensky regime is just trying to buy time to figure out a way to exit this thing in one piece. Yeah.
Well,
And Lavrov knows it. Patrushev knows it. Everyone knows it, that they're just trying to buy time.
Absolutely. And, I think they think, that they can get the Chinese and the Indians and all of the others to somehow put... Well, the Chinese and the Indians and the Hungarians and the Brazilians and all of these are getting more and more angry with the Ukrainians. And the Ukrainians, of course, simply will not accept this. So, as I said, we're heading for a smash. And I think that there is absolutely nothing now that anybody can do that can change it. As you rightly said, this is the last sustained, serious attempt to try to stop this, to try to help the Ukrainians out of this disastrous situation that they find themselves in. But it's achieved nothing because the Ukrainians don't want to talk. I mean, it's as simple as that. I think they would, psychologically, it is easier for them to lose than to negotiate. And that's the situation that we're in.
All right, we will end the video there at theduran.locals.com. We are on Rumble, Odyssey, BitChute, Telegram, Rockfin, and Twitter X. And go to the Duran shop, pick up some limited edition merch. The link is in the description box down below. Take care.